Hey guys, tonight we're crawling into a longhouse so dark it makes your blackout curtains look like neon. No alarms, no glowing rectangles, no roommates stomping in at 2 a. Just the slow breath of 20 bodies, the creak of timber, and the kind of hush that made the Vikings believe the night wasn't just a backdrop, it was a temple. They didn't chase dreams, they believed dreams found them. So before you get comfortable, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this quiet little corner of the internet. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. It's strangely beautiful to see so many of us strangers, yet aligned, slipping into sleep together. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum or light a candle if you're feeling historically committed. Tonight, we're not just talking about sleep. We're stepping into the kind of night the Vikings called sacred. In the heart of a Viking winter, as snow blanketed the land and firelight danced along timber walls, families in Norse longhouses prepared for sleep not as a chore, but as a natural part of life. There were no alarms, no emails, no glowing screens. Sleep arrived slowly, gently, as the world outside turned still and dark. They lay down beside each other, parents, children. Elderson shared bedding layered with straw and fur, their bodies warmed by the hearth and each other's presence. Unlike today, they didn't obsess over how many hours they got or track it with apps. There was no pressure to optimize or perform sleep. It simply happened in rhythm with nature, with darkness, and with the soft fatigue earned by a day of physical work. For many of us now entrepreneurs, burning midnight oil or freelancers pushing deadlines, rest has become elusive. But what if we've been doing it wrong all along? What if the key to better sleep isn't more effort, but less? Not more technology, but more simplicity? As we explore how the Vikings slept, we might just uncover lessons not only for rest, but for a better, quieter life. In our modern world, sleep has become both a luxury and a battlefield. We schedule it, analyze it, and even compete over who sleeps more efficiently. Wearable devices monitor our every breath. Apps chart our REM cycles like stock graphs. We buy mattresses engineered with space-age foam, listen to audio programs that promise to hack our brains into deep sleep, and sip herbal concoctions named for ancient gods. And yet, night after night, many of us lie awake restless, worried, staring at the ceiling in the glow of a smartphone screen. It wasn't always this way. For most of human history, sleep wasn't measured in hours or optimized for productivity. It simply happened. The now common idea that we must get exactly 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep is not based on some eternal truth. It's a recent invention, born from the Industrial Revolution, refined by electric lighting, and solidified by modern work schedules. Prior to all of this, humans across cultures, including the Vikings, slept very differently. Sleep historians, yes, that's a real field, have studied pre-industrial societies extensively, and they tell a surprising story. Before the age of alarm clocks and shift work, segmented or biphasic sleep was the norm. People would fall asleep shortly after nightfall, wake naturally in the middle of the night for an hour or two, then return to a second sleep until dawn. During this waking period, people weren't alarmed or disoriented. They used the time for quiet reflection, prayer, conversation, even light work. In some cases, this midnight interlude was seen as the most peaceful part of the day. For the Vikings, this pattern made perfect sense. Living in northern latitudes where darkness stretched for 16 to 20 hours in the winter, the idea of sleeping straight through wasn't just unrealistic, it was unnecessary. Instead, their nights were shaped by the natural ebb and flow of the firelight, the rhythm of the household, and the body's own biological cues. Without artificial light to suppress melatonin or digital distractions to delay sleep onset, they drifted into rest when the world around them dimmed, and they rose when it felt natural to do so. Compare that to today. We fight against our own biology. Screens pump out blue light that tricks our brain into thinking it's still daytime. We work long hours under fluorescent bulbs, spend our evenings under LED light, and then wonder why our brains resist sleep when we finally shut down. Our jobs demand early mornings, our social lives stretch late into the night. We try to live like machines, and then medicate ourselves when we fail to power down properly. In Canada and the US, chronic sleep deprivation has become widespread. The CDC classifies it as a public health epidemic. More than 1 in 3 adults reports not getting enough sleep on a regular basis. Among entrepreneurs and freelancers, the rates are even higher. These are people used to pushing boundaries, chasing opportunity, and maximizing time. But often, that ambition comes at the cost of rest. For creatives and knowledge workers, the mind doesn't simply switch off, it churns. It calculates, it imagines, especially at night. And here's the paradox: the more we try to control sleep, the worse we seem to get at it. The harder we work to improve our rest, the more elusive it becomes. Like trying to force a cat to sit still, the act of chasing sleep often makes it sprint further away. Sleep, it turns out, is not a performance. It cannot be scheduled into submission or engineered into perfection. It is a natural response to a lifestyle that supports it. That's why revisiting how the Vikings approached rest is not an exercise in nostalgia, it's a source of wisdom. They didn't sleep better because they were more disciplined or had access to ancient secrets. They slept better because their lives were shaped by conditions that allowed sleep to happen on its own. Their homes were dark and quiet. Their bodies were tired from physical labor. Their minds were not overstimulated by endless input. There were no deadlines ticking in the background of their thoughts, no 24-hour news cycles keeping them on edge. Imagine for a moment a typical winter night in a Viking settlement. The day ends early. The sky turns black before dinner. Inside the longhouse, a shared fire warms the space. Families gather close. The pace of life slows naturally. Without much fuss, people begin to drift off. A few hours later, they wake. There is no alarm, just a subtle stirring. Someone adds wood to the fire. Another sips from a cup of mead or water. They talk softly. Some sit and reflect. Others lie quietly, staring into the dark, unbothered. And then, again, they sleep. Contrast that to the modern experience. You're working on your laptop until 11 p.m. Phone buzzing with notifications. Your brain is spinning with tasks left undone. You feel the pressure to get to bed because your app warned you you're behind on your sleep score, where you lie down, eyes wide open, feeling guilty that you're not sleeping fast enough. This is the real lesson of the Viking sleep paradox. Sleep doesn't respond well to pressure. It's not a reward for hard work, nor a goal to be tracked. It's a biological rhythm that thrives when we live in ways that respect it. And in our efforts to modernize everything, we may have unintentionally broken the very conditions that once allowed sleep to flourish. So, what can we learn? Perhaps instead of obsessing over tools and metrics, we should return to simplicity. We can dim the lights in the evening, set routines that calm rather than stimulate, and embrace natural darkness. We can remember that it's okay to wake in the middle of the night, that rest is not defined by unbroken hours but by overall ease. And most importantly, we can stop treating sleep like a productivity metric and start treating it like what it really is, gift of being human. The Vikings didn't have sleep coaches, but they had rhythm. They didn't have gadgets, but they had balance. And maybe, just maybe, that's what we need more of now, before alarm clocks, before electricity, and long before sleep clinics and smart beds. People slept in a rhythm dictated by nothing more than the rising and setting of the sun. Among Viking communities, this rhythm took a form that may seem unusual today, but was once entirely natural biphasic sleep, instead of the modern concept of one long, uninterrupted 8-hour slumber. Viking sleep was often split into 2 distinct parts, a first sleep and a second sleep, with a quiet, contemplative period in between. Historical references to this pattern are scattered across various cultures, but the Old Norse sagas offer some of the clearest glimpses. Words like Fursveffen and Tarsveffen, first sleep and second sleep, are not poetic flourishes but matter-of-fact descriptions of daily life. In these tales, we find scenes where people rise in the middle of the night not because of restlessness, but because it was expected, even welcomed. During this interval, which lasted about an hour or two, people engaged in quiet tasks, prayer, conversation, mending tools, checking on animals, or even light intimacy. Then, as sleepiness returned, they'd slip back into their second rest without guilt or alarm. This practice wasn't unique to the Norse, but the environmental conditions in Viking lands made it especially practical. Long winter nights in Scandinavia often meant 16 or more hours of darkness. Without electric light to extend the day artificially, it made sense to divide the night into manageable portions. The middle watch, as it came to be known, became a time of stillness, neither day nor night, neither fully asleep nor fully awake. Archaeological evidence supports this rhythm, in preserved longhouses excavated in Norway and Iceland. Ash layers in hearths suggest fires were routinely tended more than once during the night. These hearths weren't just a source of warmth, they were the heart of the home, and their maintenance often fell to whoever was awake during the middle hours. The simple act of adding a log to the fire or adjusting the banked embers became part of the sleep routine. It's not unlike someone today getting up for a drink of water or checking the thermostat. Except in the Viking world, it was not disruptive, it was expected. The circadian rhythm are internal biological clockies wired to respond to light and dark cycles. But research suggests that in the absence of artificial light, human bodies naturally drift into what sleep scientists call a segmented pattern. Studies done on volunteers who lived in light-controlled environments found that they, too, began sleeping in two parts, with a period of wakeful calm in between. This phase was marked not by agitation, but by increased prolactin levels, a hormone associated with relaxation and contentment. In other words, our bodies are biologically capable and perhaps even designed for this kind of sleep. For entrepreneurs and creatives today, this idea may seem wildly counterintuitive. We're taught that the gold standard is one clean stretch of sleep, uninterrupted and efficient. Waking up at 2 a.m., that's a problem to solve. But in the Viking world, it was simply part of the night's shape. Some may have risen to check the livestock or step outside and mark the stars. Others might quietly speak to their spouse or simply lie in thought. There was no shame in it, no anxiety. The timing of this segmented sleep has also intrigued researchers. The most common pattern now, called the 4-1-for-4 model, consists of 4 hours of sleep, an hour of wakefulness, followed by another 4 hours of rest. This model aligns closely with descriptions found in medieval texts and sagas, and fits neatly with what archaeologists and anthropologists have inferred from the Viking world. During that 1 hour window, people often felt calm, introspective, even spiritually connected. Dreams were vivid, and the mind was still. It was not a time of doing, but of being. There is something poetic about this kind of night sleeping when your body asks you to, waking gently into a quiet world, and then returning to sleep without judgment or frustration. It mirrors the natural ebb and flow of energy, the kind many of us experience but fight against with caffeine, schedules, and glowing screens. What might this look like today? Imagine you go to bed at 9:30 p.m. By 1:30 a.m., you wake naturally. Instead of panicking about broken sleep, you accept the moment. You read a few pages of a novel, write a few lines in a journal, or simply sit in the dark and think. By 2:30 or 3:00 a.m., you're ready to sleep again. You do, deeply, until morning. You rise at 7:00 a.m., feeling whole. No grogginess, no stress, just a full night's rest, broken only by a pause that may have brought peace rather than worry. This is the kind of rhythm the Vikings knew. It was woven into their winters, reinforced by their architecture, and shaped by their trust in the natural world. It wasn't perfect or scientifically designed, but it worked. And the more we understand it, the more we realize it might work for us too, especially in a world where the very way we sleep seems broken. Perhaps the lesson here is not that we should all adopt a biphasic pattern immediately, but that we should stop fearing the quiet wakefulness of the night. That posexo, often seen as failure, might actually be a forgotten doorway to deeper rest, creative thought, or spiritual clarity. The Vikings didn't have a word for insomnia, but they did have time to rest, time to rise, time to return to sleep again. In their world, the night was not a single block to be conquered. It was a landscape to wander through, with valleys of rest and peaks of quiet awareness. They accepted the pauses as part of the whole, and maybe, just maybe, we should too. As the last of the daylight faded over the snow-covered hills of coastal Norway, Bjorn finished stacking the final bundle of firewood against the outer wall of his longhouse. The air was crisp, carrying the smell of sea salt and pine, and his breath lingered in clouds as he stepped inside. His boots thudded softly on the packed earth floor, and a wave of warmth greeted him, part from the low burning hearth at the centre of the home, and part from the presence of family already gathered close. Bjorn was a farmer, like his father before him, not a warrior or seafarer, but a man of land and rhythm. His hands were thick and calloused from splitting logs and binding hay. The year was sometime in the late 900s, and the land around their settlement was quiet with winter. For men like Bjorn, winter was less about rest and more about recalibration. The harvest was stored, the animals sheltered, and the daily routines had slowed, but there was still much to tend. Sleep, in this context, was as seasonal as the snow outside. Dinner had been simple but nourishing, a thick barley porridge flavoured with dried herbs, served alongside preserved fish and fermented cabbage. Everyone sat around the hearth, knees nearly touching. The children, still small and wide-eyed, listened intently as Bjorn's wife, Runa, told an old saga about a traveller who outwitted a mountain troll. The firelight flickered across her face, casting her words in a kind of magic. Even Bjorn, who had heard the story many times before, found himself smiling at the familiar turns. As the story ended, silence settled naturally. There was no need for anyone to announce bedtime. The rhythm of the day, shaped by labour and light, had already made the decision. They laid out bedding layers of straw topped with woven wool blankets and pelts, and positioned themselves side by side along the raised sleeping platforms that lined the longhouse walls. Bjorn lay next to Runa, their youngest child curled between them, already half asleep with a thumb in her mouth. The fire was banked to burn low, just enough to keep the chill away. It crackled occasionally, a gentle companion to the quiet breathing of the household. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing snow against the wooden beams with a soft sigh. Inside, all was calm. Bjorn drifted into his first sleep with the ease of a man who had worked hard but not rushed, whose muscles ached with honest fatigue, not stress. His dreams came quickly, fragments of sheep in springtime fields, the rhythm of an oar against water, the voice of his father calling over a hill. Somewhere around the middle of the night, Bjorn stirred. He didn't wake with a jolt, nor did he feel panic. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and the air had cooled slightly. He sat up quietly so as not to disturb Runa, who continued to sleep soundly. Slipping on a wool tunic, he padded barefoot across the longhouse to the door and eased it open. Outside, the sky was a deep blue-black, thick with stars. No moon tonight, but the snow reflected the starlight, lighting the yard with a faint, silvery glow. Bjorn walked to the small barn where the livestock were kept. The cows were dozing peacefully. One calf stirred at his presence but made no noise. He checked the hay, adjusted a loose plank in the stall, then stood still for a moment, listening. The silence was profound. No barking dogs, no distant traffic, just wind and breath and wood settling. Back inside. Bjorn added a log to the hearth and stirred the coals until a flame licked up. He sat near the fire, rubbing his hands. Runa, now half awake, joined him, pulling a blanket around her shoulders. They talked softly about the upcoming thaw, whether to trade for more iron nails before spring, how their oldest son had outgrown his boots again. These were not weighty decisions, just small recalibrations of daily life. And then, without prompting, they returned to bed. Bjorn's second sleep came just as easily. His body welcomed it, as if completing a cycle. There were no expectations, no thoughts of whether he'd gotten enough hours. There was no judgment. Rest was something you moved with, not something you battled for. What modern culture might label interrupted sleep, Bjorn experienced as natural flow. He didn't count the hours or compare his rest to anyone else's. There was no Fitbit tracking him, no app calculating his sleep efficiency. And yet, when morning came gradual, slow, golden, he rose feeling whole. This one winter night in Bjorn's life was not exceptional. It was normal. It happened thousands of times across thousands of households in Viking lands. Each family had their own routines, their own stories, their own fire to bank. But the essence was the same. Sleep was communal, seasonal, and shaped by nature. For us today, this way of living feels distant, quaint, even. But there is wisdom buried in its simplicity. Bjorn's life did not offer ease in the way we understand it. There was hardship, cold, illness. But when it came to sleep, he was rich. His nights were not filled with anxiety about waking up or guilt about not sleeping enough. He simply followed the dark, let his body guide him, and trusted that rest would return when it was ready. There's a lesson there for the modern entrepreneur, the late-night freelancer, the content creator burning the candle at both ends. Rest doesn't come from fighting fatigue or outsmarting biology. It comes from aligning with it, like Bjorn. Maybe we don't need to control the modern culture teaches us that a good night's sleep means one long, uninterrupted stretch of at least 8 hours. But biology, it turns out, has a different opinion. Long before electricity and alarm clocks, our ancestors, including the Vikings, slept in a segmented way 2 distinct periods of rest, separated by a gentle interval of wakefulness. It wasn't a disorder, it was the design. And the deeper we look into the science of our bodies, the more we discover how well suited we are to this natural rhythm. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence for the biology of segmented sleep is the hormone prolactin. In studies where participants were allowed to sleep in complete darkness for longer durations, replicating pre-industrial winter conditions, scientists noticed something remarkable. Participants naturally drifted into a biphasic sleep pattern. Between the 2 sleep periods, they entered a quiet state of rest, not fully asleep, but deeply relaxed. During this interval, prolactin levels in the blood spiked and remained high for longer than during traditional sleep. Prolactin, often associated with lactation, also plays a broader role in relaxation and immune regulation. Its levels typically rise during sleep, but they remain especially elevated in the hour or 2 of quiet wakefulness between segmented sleeps. People in this state report a profound sense of calmer, restful consciousness. It's a hormonal signature of peace. Unlike the anxious wakefulness that often haunts modern insomniacs, this midnight pause was once a gift, a time to think, to be still, to experience quiet without expectation. Alongside prolactin, melatonin, hormone that governs sleep timing, follows natural light-dark cycles. When artificial light is removed from the equation, melatonin release begins earlier in the evening and tapers off more gradually into the morning. This supports a gentle entry into segmented sleep and a slow, natural return to full wakefulness. It also helps explain why the Vikings, who had no access to screens or light pollution, could fall asleep easily and wake in the middle of the night without anxiety. Beyond hormones, there are cognitive benefits too. Research has shown that people who sleep in 2 parts often experience richer, more vivid dreams. The waking period between sleeps allows for better dream recall and even a kind of conscious processing of what was just dreamt. This reflective space fosters creativity, emotional insight, and problem-solving skills that, in today's knowledge economy, are more valuable than ever. Physical recovery also seems to improve under segmented sleep. The body gets 2 chances to enter deep restorative phases. Rather than one prolonged climb through the stages of sleep, the body cycles twice through them. Muscles recover, tissues repair, and the immune system strengthens. In some studies, athletes who adopted a segmented sleep schedule reported fewer injuries and faster recovery times. It's a strategy that may sound ancient, but it aligns well with modern performance science. So why did we abandon this natural model? The answer lies in industrialization. With the spread of electric lighting and shift-based factory work in the 19th century, society began prioritizing uniform schedules. A single block of sleep-efficient, predictable, and easy to manage became the gold standard. Over time, the idea of waking up in the night began to be seen as abnormal or unhealthy. What had once been an accepted, even sacred part of the night became labeled as insomnia. Today, the pressure to sleep 8 hours straight is immense, and for many it's a source of constant stress. People lie in bed watching the clock, counting the hours they've lost, worrying about how tired they'll be tomorrow. This anxiety disrupts the very rest they're chasing. It becomes a self-defeating cycle. Segmented sleep, by contrast, offers a more forgiving rhythm. It accepts that the body may want to rest, reflect, and rest again. It does not demand perfection. It simply allows for presence. Think of a modern entrepreneur late planning, pitching, thinking. They may fall asleep out of sheer exhaustion, wake in the dark and feel defeated. But if they knew about segmented sleep, they might use that hour to jot down thoughts, stretch, sip something warm, and return to sleep with ease. It turns the night into a partnership rather than a contest. Older adults, especially those over 55, often find themselves waking at night and blaming age. But what if their bodies are simply returning to a natural rhythm they knew in youth, one that was suppressed for decades by the demands of work and structure? For many, Embracing segmented sleep could bring peace instead of frustration. It allows us to let go of the rigid expectations and instead listen to our biology. Even in urban Canada or a condo in the US, some of this ancient rhythm can be reclaimed. By dimming lights in the evening, avoiding screens before bed, and allowing the night to unfold without panic, people can rediscover what the Vikings took for granted: sleep as a sequence, not a sprint. Ultimately, segmented sleep reminds us that rest is not a task to be conquered. It is a dance with biology, one that favors softness over rigidity, patience over precision. The hormones support it, the body responds to it, the mind benefits from it. The Vikings didn't know the word prolactin, they didn't measure melatonin, but their lived experience aligns remarkably well with what modern science is now confirming. And in that alignment, we find hope not just for better sleep, but for a kinder relationship with the night. What we call insomnia may, in fact, be a misinterpretation of nature's oldest rhythm, and if we listen carefully, that rhythm is still there waiting in the quiet between sleeps. In the Viking Age, darkness was not something to be fought. It was accepted, even welcomed, as part of the rhythm of life. Inside the wooden longhouses of Scandinavia, once the sun slipped behind the horizon, the world faded into deep shadows. There were no glass windows to let in moonlight, no LED alarm clocks glowing in the night, no street lamps piercing through cracks in the walls. The darkness inside these homes was profound, and in that darkness, something powerful happened. The body surrendered to sleep, not out of exhaustion, but in harmony with nature. Unlike our modern homes, filled with blue light-emitting screens and constant visual stimulation, a Viking dwelling after nightfall was enveloped in what scientists now call light isolation. Once the hearth was banked low and the torches extinguished, the human body was left to experience the night in its purest form. In that environment, melatonin production didn't just begin, it sustained. The body received no artificial signal that the day was still going. Instead, it responded naturally, allowing hormones to guide rest with precision and grace. Melatonin, the hormone responsible for regulating sleep-wake cycles, is triggered by the absence of light. Even low levels of artificial light like the glow from a television or smartphone can disrupt its release. In Viking homes, melatonin had free rein. During the long winters, where darkness could stretch 16 hours or more, the body entered a prolonged state of restfulness. It wasn't just about more hours of sleep. It was about deeper, more consistent sleep. In modern clinical sleep studies, researchers have recreated these conditions. When participants are placed in dark environments with no access to artificial light, their melatonin levels not only increase, but stay elevated for longer periods. These subjects fall asleep more quickly, experience longer stretches of deep sleep, and report waking with greater mental clarity. In essence, they are mimicking the Viking night, and their bodies respond with gratitude. The idea of darkness as medicine might sound poetic, but science supports the claim. Our brains are wired to rest when the world grows dim. Darkness cues the body to lower cortisol, the stress hormone, and allows melatonin to take over. In that quiet hormonal exchange, heart rate slow, body temperature drops, and the mind shifts into a state of repair. Memory consolidation, tissue recovery, emotional processing all happen more efficiently in total darkness. Now imagine the Viking lifestyle in this light. Their homes, constructed of thick timber and turf, kept out both cold and light. After sunset, life wound down naturally. There were no night shifts, no scrolling through glowing rectangles. There was storytelling, maybe some mending or quiet conversation, and then rest. The darkness that surrounded them was not a burden, it was a signal. It told the body it was time to let go. Even the architecture of the longhouse supported this. With only one or two small openings for air, usually covered or sealed in winter, the interiors were dim even during daylight hours. At night, without candles or oil lamps burning constantly, luxuries not to be wasted, the rooms were pitch black. Sleep came not just because the body was tired, but because everything else had gone quiet. The darkness itself was therapeutic. This kind of immersive darkness is nearly impossible to replicate in the modern world. City dwellers live under the constant hum of light pollution. Even in rural areas, interior lighting, clocks, chargers, and other devices emit low-level light that disrupts the sleep cycle. But for the Vikings, winter darkness offered a kind of reset. It aligned their inner clock with the Earth's rotation, the seasons, and the sky. There's also a mental component to all this. Darkness slows us down. It reduces external input, forcing the mind inward. It creates space for reflection, dreaming, and healing. In therapy, sensory reduction is often used to calm the nervous system. The Viking night provided that without needing a therapist, the dark was its own medicine. For older adults, those in their 50s, 60s, and beyond, sleep becomes lighter and more fragile. The body's melatonin production naturally declines with age. But that doesn't mean deep rest is impossible. In fact, adopting Viking principles of darkness might be especially beneficial. By eliminating ambient light in the bedroom, using heavy curtains, covering light sources, and avoiding screens before bed, many older adults report improvements in both sleep quality and morning energy. For modern creatives and entrepreneurs, the lesson is equally potent. Darkness improves focus, encourages a slower pace, and supports recovery from the mental clutter of digital life. A well-designed evening ritual that leans into darkness, dimming lights, turning off screens, creating quiet can act as a bridge from high-functioning problem-solving into soft, regenerative sleep. Think of it not as turning off the world, but tuning into yourself. Of course, total darkness isn't always possible, but intentional darkness, designed darkness can be. Use warm, low lighting in the evening. Trade overhead bulbs for candles or lamps. Let night be dark again, at least inside your home. The Vikings didn't fear the night, they moved with it, and in doing so, they unlocked a kind of rest that many of us have forgotten. In embracing darkness, they embraced healing. Perhaps it's time we do the same. For most of us today, light is a given. With a flick of a switch, our homes flood with illumination. But for the Vikings, light was a resource. Precious, limited, and treated with deep intention. As the sun disappeared for months at a time during the long Scandinavian winters, Viking households turned to their own technologies for navigating the dark. But these weren't technologies in the modern sense. They were elemental, fire-based, and rooted in the rhythms of nature. More importantly, they worked in harmony with the human body rather than against it. The main sources of light inside a Viking home were beeswax candles, oil lamps, and the hearth fire itself. Each provided a glow that was soft, flickering, and warm. Unlike modern blue and white lights that suppress melatonin and confuse the body's internal clock, these natural light sources emitted red and amber hues, the same spectrum produced by sunsets. These colors don't interfere with the sleep cycle. Instead, they signal the brain to relax, to prepare for rest. In other words, Viking lighting supported healthy sleep at a hormonal level. Beeswax candles, when available, were the most prized. They burned clean and long, and their scent was pleasant and subtle, but they were expensive to produce and often reserved for ceremonial or spiritual purposes. More commonly, Viking families used oil lamps fueled by animal fat, often seal, or whale oil along the coasts, or tallow made from livestock further inland. These lamps were carved from soapstone or clay and had a small wick that produced a steady, amber flame. The hearth fire, however, was the true heart of the home. It served as both kitchen and furnace, providing heat, light, and a place to gather. Vikings knew how to manage their fire while banking it overnight, stoking it strategically, and keeping it low to conserve wood. The fire was not always blazing. Often, it glowed just enough to warm the room and offer a faint golden shimmer on the walls. That gentle illumination, combined with the earthy scent of smoke and the quiet sounds of crackling embers, created an atmosphere of safety and calm. What's fascinating is how Vikings approached light use, not as a matter of utility but as part of daily ritual. Lighting a lamp at night wasn't just about banishing the dark, it was a moment of intention. Some sagas and folk customs speak of specific prayers or blessings said when lighting candles, particularly during long winter nights. These rituals framed the flame not as technology, but as connection to ancestors, to gods, to memory. Because lighting materials were scarce and labor-intensive to produce, Vikings used light sparingly. There was no staying up all night binging stories by bright lamps. Tasks that required intense visibility were saved for daylight. Evening was for talking, reflecting, and unwinding. The body, bathed in the red glow of a lamp or fire, began its descent toward rest. In this way, Viking light culture supported sleep instead of fighting it. Even more impressive was how Vikings created artificial darkness during the summer. In parts of Scandinavia, the sun barely sets in midsummer, creating an endless day. But the need for rest didn't vanish. To manage this, Vikings used heavy woven curtains, hide panels, and even strategically built longhouses with minimal window openings on the northern side to block out light. In essence, they made their own night. This understanding of light and how to live with it demonstrates a sophisticated grasp of circadian rhythm, long before science gave it a name. Modern studies confirm that exposure to natural red spectrum light in the evening promotes melatonin production, while limiting artificial light, especially in the blue-white spectrum, improves sleep onset and quality. The Vikings, through intuition and necessity, lived this truth every day. Today, our world is flooded with artificial brightness. Streetlights, phones, computer screens, all of them push against our biology. They extend our waking hours, disrupt our hormones, and make it harder to wind down. We live in defiance of darkness, but we pay the price in restless nights and shallow sleep. Yet the Viking model is still accessible. We can reclaim some of their wisdom by being more mindful of our own light environment. At night, consider using warm-toned bulbs, candles, or low lamps instead of overhead LEDs. Create evening rituals that include lowering the lights, turning off screens, and letting the body ease into rest. If it's summer and you live far north, invest in blackout curtains. Your biology still needs the dark. For older adults and modern creatives alike, this awareness can transform nights. Instead of feeling wired and overstimulated before bed, you can shift into a slower, softer gear. The mind begins to settle, the body responds. Sleep comes naturally, not as a command, but as a welcome guest. There's also beauty in this return to darkness. In candlelight, faces soften, voices grow quieter, conversations take on a different rhythm. It's not just about sleep, it's about intimacy, presence, and connection. The Vikings understood this. Their evenings were not just dim, they were deliberate. There is also a psychological comfort in low light that modern people often forget. Harsh overhead lights keep us alert and in task mode, but soft lighting signals safety. It quiets the nervous system. For entrepreneurs working late, switching from a bright screen to a dim lamp can be the difference between burnout and balance. This shift not only nurtures sleep, but also creativity. When the brain no longer fights overstimulation, it begins to wander, imagine, and process more freely. In design thinking and creative fields, there is a reason why brainstorming often happens in relaxed settings, lounges, coffee shops, late-night walks. Lighting contributes to this. The Vikings didn't have neuroscience to explain it, but they experienced it firsthand. Their light practices supported storytelling, wisdom sharing, and emotional bonding, especially in winter when communal resilience mattered most. Even the flicker of firelight, unpredictable, warm, and alive, activates parts of the brain associated with calm attention and meditation. Researchers today suggest that watching fire lowers blood pressure and promotes social bonding. The Vikings didn't just survive the long nights, they thrived in them. Their light wasn't just a tool, it was a teacher. When you light a candle at night or watch the flame of a fire flicker, you're participating in something ancient, something that links you to people who knew the value of rest, people who honored the night, people who, without knowing the word melatonin, still lived in harmony with its call. Viking light technology was simple, but its effects were profound. In a world now obsessed with brightness, maybe the answer to better sleep isn't more light, but less. Maybe the answer is already waiting in the soft glow of firelight, the hush of evening, and the wisdom of those who slept well because they lit wisely. Before calendars hung on walls or digital clocks blinked on nightstands, time moved by the moon. For the Vikings, as with many ancient cultures, the lunar cycle was more than just a way to mark days, it was a guide for life. From planting and harvesting to travel, trade, and sleep, the phases of the moon offered a rhythm that shaped daily behavior and collective expectation. The moon was watched closely. Its waxing and waning dictated not just tides, but moods, energy levels, and even dreams. The Norse calendar was built around a lunar solar system, blending the solar year with lunar months. This meant that Viking timekeeping, and the cultural rituals tied to it, followed the dance between sunlight and moonlight. Farmers, hunters, and seafarers learned to read the moon's face like a map, knowing when the tides would shift or when a long journey was best avoided. In particular, the full moon carried a kind of energy that could not be ignored. Even without artificial light, a full moon would drench the landscape in silver, turning night into a kind of second day. People and animals stirred more easily under its glow. For the Vikings, this brightness might have meant extended storytelling, late-night chores, or even spiritual rituals, and as modern research now shows, it likely also meant disrupted sleep. Multiple sleep studies have confirmed a curious link between full moons and lighter, more fragmented sleep. Participants in controlled environments shielded from moonlight, unaware of lunar phases, still experienced difficulty falling asleep and spent less time in deep sleep when the moon was full. This suggests a biological sensitivity to the moon's cycle, embedded deep in human evolution. The Vikings wouldn't have had clinical data to prove this, but they lived close enough to the natural world to feel its truth. On nights with strong moonlight, the longhouse might have been more restless. Children would stir, animals would shift, adults might sit up and talk longer, but none of this would be met with frustration. It was simply accepted as part of the cycle. If sleep was shorter, rest would come again with the waning moon. There was no guilt in these shifts, no fear that a lost hour of sleep would ruin the next day. People lived by the moon, not against it. And that difference in mindset made all the difference. Just as the full moon could stir restlessness, the new moon with its deep darkness invited deeper sleep, introspection, and withdrawal. Vikings may have planned their travel or labor accordingly, favoring the clarity of waxing moons and reserving the darker nights for tasks closer to home. In coastal areas, the moon's pull on the tides also shaped when ships could be launched or brought ashore. This built a natural rhythm into life, a rhythm modern life has largely forgotten. Yet traces of lunar influence still linger. Many people today report insomnia around the full moon. Emergency rooms often notice a slight uptick in visits. Police officers talk about weird nights without knowing why. While science continues to explore the cause, ancient cultures like the Vikings had already accepted the outcome. More than just passive observers, the Vikings adapted their behavior to match the moon's phases. On waxing moons, they leaned into growth and activity. On waning moons, they focused on repair and rest. This was mysticism, it was pattern recognition, refined through generations of watching the sky. Modern entrepreneurs and creatives, so often ruled by deadlines and artificial calendars, might find value in reclaiming this lunar awareness. Instead of demanding the same level of output every day, what if we acknowledged natural ebbs and flows? What if, on full moon nights when sleep feels elusive, we allowed ourselves the space to dream, reflect, or journal instead of tossing and turning in frustration? Older adults, too, may benefit from aligning evening routines with lunar phases, dimming lights even more during full moons, using blackout curtains, or embracing brief nighttime wakefulness as natural can all reduce anxiety around sleep. Sometimes, just knowing your body is responding to the same moon that guided generations before you is enough to bring peace. The Vikings didn't call it circadian disruption or hormonal fluctuation. They simply called it night, and some nights were different. By living with the moon instead of despite it, they made space for rest in its many forms: light, deep, short, interrupted, or full. Lunar calendars still exist. Many cultures still celebrate festivals and rituals based on the moon. But in daily life, most of us have disconnected from the sky. The sun sets, and we turn on artificial light. The moon waxes, and we scroll through screens. Yet, our bodies remember. We are, in many ways, still lunar creatures. Perhaps it's time we looked up again. In fact, some Viking longhouses were aligned with the moon, or constructed in ways that allowed shafts of moonlight to enter at particular angles, marking seasons or signaling festivals. These subtle architectural choices weren't just functional, they were symbolic, anchoring community identity to the cycles of the cosmos. In such an environment, a person did not feel separate from the world, but part of a greater rhythm. That connection alone could be healing. There's growing modern interest in moon rituals, intentional moments of mindfulness tied to the lunar calendar. While these may seem New Age, their roots trace back to societies like the Vikings. A full moon journal, a new moon meditation, or simply observing the moons progress across the sky can ground us in a world that often feels rushed and fragmented. These rituals don't need to be spiritual. They can be practicalist to track energy levels, creative surges, or times of rest. Biologically, the pineal gland, which produces melatonin, may be subtly responsive to lunar phases. Some studies suggest that moonlight, even indirect, can influence sleep timing and REM activity. This echoes the Viking experience, reinforcing that the moon's presence is not just poetic, but physiological. If we think of our sleep not as a machine to be perfectly programmed, but as a tide to be tuned to, then the moon becomes a partner. It whispers when to act and when to pause. The Vikings heard that whisper. It is still there for us, if we learn to listen. In the age of the Vikings, sleep was not a solitary act. It was communal, woven into the fabric of daily life, deeply rooted in survival, and gently shaped by the architecture of the home. The longhouse, central to Norse domestic life, was more than a place of shelter. It was a space of closeness, kinship, and shared warmth. And nowhere was this more evident than in the way its people slept. Inside a Viking longhouse, there were no private bedrooms, no doors to close or personal pillows to claim. The main sleeping arrangement consisted of raised platforms built along both side walls of the hall. These sleeping benches, lined with straw or animal skins, were wide enough to fit multiple people, children, parents, grandparents, hired hands, and sometimes even travellers passing through. This wasn't just a practical solution for limited space. It was intentional. Sleeping together served a vital purpose, especially in a climate where the winters were long and brutal. Body heat was not wasted, it was shared. The architecture reinforced this. Low ceilings, few windows, and thick walls helped trap warmth. The hearth in the centre of the room, sometimes banked with coals through the night, gave off heat that slowly radiated outward, warming the slumbering bodies huddled on either side. For the modern mind, this might sound chaotic or uncomfortable. Imagine sharing a sleeping space with noisy children, elders, or even people outside your family. But for the Vikings, this closeness fostered a sense of safety and stability. The night was a time of vulnerability. Sharing it with others didn't diminish rest, it enhanced it. There's a reason infants sleep better when held, and why young children ask to sleep in their parents' bed during storms. Human beings are wired to feel secure in proximity to others. This is especially true during sleep, when the senses shut down and the body surrenders to unconsciousness. For early societies like the Vikings, sleeping communally wasn't just custom, it was a biological strategy. Safety in numbers wasn't a metaphor, it was a nightly truth. This shared sleeping environment also allowed for quiet bonding. Elders might whisper stories to the younger ones before sleep. Conversations would drift into silence, punctuated only by the occasional crackle from the hearth. The rhythm of communal breath, the rustle of blankets, the muffled turning of bodies, it created a background music that soothed rather than disturbed. In the darkness, one might hear a grandparent murmuring old sagas or a child giggling at a familiar tale. These moments didn't disrupt sleep, they prepared the body and mind for it. The rituals of bedtime were not private affairs, but part of the household's shared rhythm. This nightly cohesion strengthened family ties and passed knowledge from one generation to the next. And perhaps more importantly, communal sleeping helped regulate sleep patterns naturally. When one person began to rise, stirred by the fire being rekindled or the sounds of animals outside, the others gradually followed. It was not a jarring alarm clock, but a slow, human cue. The day began as it ended together. Even illness and aging were treated differently in this setup. An elderly member of the family was not isolated in a separate room. They slept beside the rest, attended to easily, warmed by the same fire. The idea of sleeping alone in old age would have been foreign, even cruel. In Viking culture, sleeping together meant belonging, no matter your age, health, or role. Interestingly, modern sleep research is beginning to revisit some of these communal principles. While we often idealize solitude in sleep, studies show that sleeping next to someone, whether a spouse, child, or pet, can lead to deeper, more stable rest. Heart rates synchronize, cortisol levels drop, The body registers another's presence and relaxes. For older adults especially, the presence of another can ease nighttime anxiety. It softens the fear that something might go wrong while we sleep. In a longhouse, you were never alone with your worry. You were surrounded by breath, heartbeat, and the occasional comforting sigh in the dark. You could hear your people. That meant you were safe. For entrepreneurs and creatives, those who often burn the candle late into the night, there's something to learn from this, too. We live in a culture that praises independence, even in rest. We design minimalist bedrooms, isolate ourselves with white noise machines, and chase silence like a prize. But solitude does not always equal serenity. Sometimes, what we crave is in quiet, its connection. Today's sleep struggles are often exacerbated by loneliness. Many people lie awake not because their room is noisy, but because it is too quiet. The absence of another heartbeat becomes a weight. That deep mammalian sense of not being protected takes root. The Vikings had an answer for this sleep together. Of course, we don't live in longhouses anymore, and for many, co-sleeping isn't practical or desired. But we can still draw inspiration from the idea. Bedtime doesn't have to be the time we shut the door on our relationships. A short conversation, a warm hand to hold. Even the presence of a pet at your feet can replicate the sensory cues that signal safety to the nervous system. And beyond the physical, there's the emotional warmth of knowing we're not sleeping through life alone, that someone is there, that we are part of something larger than ourselves. The Vikings felt this every night. It was built into their homes, into their habits, into their hearts. In a time when sleep is marketed as a solo optimization project, track your data, close your rings, isolate your distractions might help to remember that rest is older than strategy, and that for much of human history, sleep was not about control, it was about closeness. The longhouse may be gone, but the lesson remains: sleep is better when we're not alone. In a Viking longhouse, sleep was not a time to let your guard down completely. It was a time to restore the body, but never to abandon awareness entirely. The structure of communal sleeping wasn't just about warmth or companionship. It was also a defensive measure, a kind of natural alarm system built into the architecture of daily life. When everyone slept in the same space, children, elders, warriors, and servants, the presence of every sound and movement was shared. There were no distant bedrooms separated by thick doors. There were no locks or alarms. There was only the subtle vigilance of a household trained by generations of uncertainty. Norse sagas often tell of characters waking in the night not because they were plagued by dreams, but because they heard something out of place, the creak of a floorboard, the sharp breath of someone entering uninvited, the bark of a dog before it settled again. In these stories, the hero who wakes quickly and quietly is praised. Sleep was important, but being roused from it at the right moment could mean the difference between life and death. The communal bench beds lining the walls of the longhouse served another function. They faced inward, toward the center hearth. This created a natural visual command post. If someone entered the longhouse from the main door, they would step into a space observed by all sleeping members, many of whom, even in a half-sleeping state, would register the unfamiliar. Unlike modern life, where sleep often occurs behind closed doors, in soundproofed rooms, Viking sleep was porous. It welcomed the rhythms of nature, but also remained alert to threats, and because the entire household rested in proximity, a disturbance that woke one would ripple through the others. The old woman might stir first, sensing a draught. The child might whisper. The man nearest the hearth would reach for his axe, not in panic, but in habit. This form of sleep wasn't restless, it was resilient. It allowed deep rest, but trained the mind to surface when needed. Even in slumber, the Viking was a watchful creature. In today's terms, we might call this a form of distributed awareness. No single person bore the burden of being the night watch. It was shared: a family, a clan, even a community, listening together. Long before motion sensors and surveillance systems, people relied on each other. Trust was not optional, it was survival. For elders, this system provided reassurance. They were not isolated in back rooms or care facilities. They slept near the fire, near their people, and knew that if danger came, they would not face it alone. For children, it established a sense of continuity that even at their most vulnerable, they were held by a net of listening ears and watchful hearts. The longhouse, with its open plan and single chamber, made this vigilance possible. But it wasn't only architecture, it was mindset. To sleep communally was to embrace mutual responsibility. Each person knew they were protected, and each person, in turn, was part of the protection. For the Vikings, this wasn't theory, it was tested. Raids, rivalries, natural threats, they were all part of life. And so, the body learned to sleep with both depth and readiness. You rested, but not alone. You let go, but never completely. Even domestic animals contributed. Dogs often slept at the feet of the family or near the doors. Their hearing, far sharper than human, extended the sensory net. A soft growl in the night might signal nothing or everything, but it was noticed, responded to, passed from one sleeper to the next until action, if needed, stirred quietly but surely. Modern homes, in contrast, often isolate sleepers from each other and from the natural sounds that once informed them. White noise machines mask the world. Bedroom doors shut tightly. People sleep with earbuds in, and in this quest for perfect rest, we may have sacrificed a primal form of protection that once made deep sleep possible in the first place. Because it's not noise that disrupts Uzit's uncertainty. The rustling of a branch won't wake a Viking, but the footstep of a stranger might. The difference is context. In the Longhouse, everyone knew the soundscape. Every creak and sigh belonged to someone. When something didn't fit, it was noticed. This collective safety net allowed individuals to truly let go. In knowing others were near, the mind could dip deeper into rest. It didn't have to stay half awake, scanning for threats. That job was shared, across ears and instincts. Some anthropologists argue that this form of sentinel sleep, where a few individuals sleep lightly while others sleep deeply, has deep evolutionary roots. Studies of modern hunter-gatherer societies, like the Hadza in Tanzania, show that someone is almost always awake during the night, even if unintentionally. In this way, the group as a whole remains guarded without assigning formal shifts. The Vikings, though centuries and continents apart, likely maintained a similar balance, and beyond mere survival, this nightly vigilance became part of cultural identity. To be a Viking was to be aware, to listen, to sense when the wind shifted or the silence turned sharp. Nighttime was not just for dreaming, it was a living part of the day charged with meaning, danger, and sometimes sacred silence. Even the myths reflect this attitude. In the Eddas, sleep is never careless. The gods themselves, despite their power, remain alert in the shadows. Odin does not slumber fully. He watches, listens, wanders. The sagas understood awareness's strength, and in the human world, sleep was safest not when deepest, but when shared. Perhaps, for modern people, this is the part we have forgotten. We imagine that better sleep comes from isolation, from retreating into ever quieter, darker spaces. But what if rest actually grows stronger in the presence of others? What if trust, not silence, is the true sedative in the Viking world? Sleep wasn't a break from life, it was part of it. Alive, connected, responsive, and secure, not in spite of that openness, but because of it. Beds, not mattresses. The Viking longhouse held no memory foam. There were no pillow-top layers, no gel cooling systems, no ads promising the perfect spine alignment with a 100-day guarantee. And yet, sleep happened, deep, restorative, dream-rich sleep, night after night, generation after generation. The bed in a Viking home was simple, just a raised wooden platform, sometimes slightly inclined, nestled along the walls of the longhouse. It wasn't soft, but it wasn't bare either. The sleeping surface was layered with straw, dried grasses or bracken depending on the season. Over that, coarse wool blankets or felted mats were placed, and finally, animal pelts fur-side up in the winter, downturned in the summer. It may not sound luxurious, but in many ways, it was far more aligned with the human body than the plush, heat-trapping beds of modern life. The wooden base allowed air to circulate beneath the sleeper, preventing moisture buildup and maintaining a steady, dry surface. The slight tilt of some platforms, often unintentional, from floor settling or deliberately built that way, allowed for better blood flow and drainage, especially helpful for those who worked physically each day. Unlike modern mattresses that cradle the body in softness, Viking beds offered a firm surface that gently encouraged the spine to remain in its natural curve. Back pain, so common today, was likely less chronic among these people, not just because of their physical activity, but also because their beds didn't force their backs into odd, unsupported positions. There was no sagging middle, no synthetic dip that slowly pulled the pelvis out of alignment over years of sleep. The use of straw or dried vegetation as a base wasn't just about comfort, it had hygienic benefits. The materials were easy to change out and could be refreshed seasonally or even monthly. They discouraged mites and pests and absorbed moisture naturally. In fact, many cultures throughout Europe retained this system for centuries, often calling the material mattress hay. It was common sense when it began to smell or compress. It was replaced, and the wool thick, coarse, and often undyed breathed in a way that modern bedding does not. It wickeded moisture, retained warmth even when slightly damp, and self-regulated temperature based on proximity to the body. Over that, thick sheepskins or deer hides provided an additional layer of insulation, making the sleeper feel cocooned without overheating. There were no bed sheets, no plastic mattress protectors, no scented detergents, but there was something else: clean air, a dry surface, and a body allowed to rest without overheating. Heat retention in modern bedding is a hidden culprit of poor sleep. Foam mattresses, particularly the dense, synthetic varieties, trap body heat, causing people to toss and turn, wake sweating, or experience shallow sleep stages. In contrast, the Viking sleeping setup dissipated heat naturally. Cold air flowed from the floor, warmth stayed in the furs, and the body remained comfortably balanced throughout the night. And perhaps most surprisingly to modern sensibilities, the Viking bed wasn't a personal item. It was communal, often shared by couples, family members, or even guests. One side of the longhouse might house several of these beds, each wide enough for 2 or 3 adults. The bedding was arranged anew each night, with blankets spread across laps and shoulders, feet tucked beneath warm skins, and at the core of it all was the sturdy wooden base, often built directly into the frame of the longhouse wall. The craftsmanship of these beds, while functional, was not without beauty. Surviving fragments suggest carved headboards, notched supports, and even inlaid patterns in some wealthier homes. A good bed frame was a mark of domestic stability, passed from parent to child, disassembled and rebuilt when homes were moved or inherited. It's telling that in Norse burial sites, miniature wooden beds were sometimes placed in grave symbols of eternal rest. In sagas, a bed is not just a place to sleep, it is a place of honor, where heroes die, where families receive guests, where secrets are shared under blankets before the fire dies down. For modern entrepreneurs, creatives, and retirees seeking better rest, the Viking approach offers a quiet challenge. Strip down the excess. Focus on breathability, on posture, on connection to natural materials. Reimagine the bed not as a luxury object, but as a tool for regeneration, not a place of consumption, but a place of clarity. Could you sleep on firmer ground? Could your spine thank you for fewer inches of foam? Could your nights feel cooler, drier, more stable? Many who try firm, natural sleeping setups report fewer aches, better circulation, and deeper sleep. And while it may take some adjustment, the return to simpler, earth-based sleeping has gained popularity in minimalist and ancestral health circles. Of course, you don't have to build a Viking longhouse to reap the benefits. Start small: a wool mattress pad, a firmer surface, a natural fiber blanket. Open the window, let the room cool. Allow gravity and simplicity to become your sleep partners. After all, the Vikings faced brutal winters, heavy labor, and unpredictable danger. Yet their beds were enough. More than enough. They supported warriors and farmers, mothers and elders, and in their unadorned honesty, they offered exactly what the body needed: grounding, warmth, and rest. Today, surrounded by options, many people are still tired. Perhaps it's not more choices we need, but fewer layers between us and the earth. Ergonomics and inclined to understand how the Vikings slept. You must first unlearn what modern comfort has taught you. Today, we often chase softness. The deeper a mattress sinks, the more luxurious we imagine it must be. Pillow top, cloud foam, gel memory. But for most of human history, comfort had less to do with softness, and more to do with support. And the Vikings understood this intuitively. Their sleeping surfaces, as simple as they seemed, struck a balance we've almost forgotten, firm but responsive. A bed that didn't yield too much, but didn't fight you either. Imagine lying on a platform of packed straw, with a layer of coarse wool and sheepskin over it. The body, when resting there, met just enough give to avoid pressure points, and just enough resistance to stay aligned. This firm yet yielding base did something vital that encouraged proper posture during sleep. The spine remained neutral, the hips didn't sink too low, the shoulders didn't twist inward, and over time, the body adapted to this structure like a well-trained tool returning to its natural shape. But there was another feature that rarely gets mentioned in sleep science today: the incline. Many Viking beds, either by design or through wear, sloped gently from head to foot. We're not talking about an angled hospital bed or a wedge pillow, just a soft incline barely noticeable, maybe an inch or two over the length of the body, and yet, that angle made a world of difference. A slight elevation of the head, say 5 to 7 degrees, can prevent gastric reflux. It allows gravity to do its quiet work overnight, helping to keep stomach acids in place and airways open. For people today who suffer from sleep apnea, snoring, or indigestion, this position is often prescribed by doctors. The Vikings didn't have clinical terms for it, but they did have observation, experience, and adaptation. They ate dense meals, they worked hard, rested hard, and lived in a world without antacids or CPAP machines. Their sleeping arrangements weren't accidental. They were practical. Compare that to the modern bed plush, horizontal, sometimes even sagging in the middle. The body sinks into the middle, the hips dip, the chest compresses, the neck bends upward in search of a pillow that's too thick or too thin. It's no wonder so many people wake with numb arms, stiff backs, or foggy minds. And ironically, the softer the mattress, the harder the night can become, because the body wasn't designed to be cradled for 8 hours. It was designed to rest on surfaces that support weight, promote circulation, and give subtle cues about position and posture. Too much softness deprives the brain of that feedback. Muscles remain subtly engaged all night trying to find balance. Rest becomes labor. The Vikings avoided all of that simply by keeping their bedding practical, firm, and slightly inclined. And they didn't need expensive products to achieve it. A few well-placed boards, a stuffed mat of straw and wool, a heavy fur, that was enough. Interestingly, modern sleep scientists are beginning to revisit these old truths. Inclined sleep therapy, where beds are tilted slightly at the head, has shown promise in reducing nighttime heartburn, improving circulation, even benefiting brain waste clearance via cerebrospinal flow. Some practitioners recommend ditching soft beds entirely and returning to grounded, minimally padded setups. For older adults especially, this is relevant. As digestion slows and joint stiffness increases, sleep becomes more than just recovery, it becomes repair. And the position you sleep in can either support that repair or fight against it. It doesn't take a long house or a Viking bed frame to try this. Some people elevate the legs of their bed's headboard by just a few centimeters. Others use a wedge under their mattress. Even sleeping with a thin mat on a slightly sloped platform like a yoga mat on a ramp can create the same effect. It's not about recreating the past, it's about remembering what worked. The Vikings didn't sleep to optimize performance, they slept to survive. But in doing so, they stumbled on what we now call ergonomic alignment. And they built that into their beds not because it was trendy, but because it was wise. Their nights were shaped by practicality, observation, and centuries of wisdom passed through firelit evenings. And perhaps, in the long view of history, they slept better for it. Nature's pillow. When you picture a Viking pillow, banish the image of a soft, fluffy cloud beneath your head. There were no feathers drifting in cotton cases, no ergonomic foam with contour memory. And yet, they slept, deeply, peacefully, night after night. The Viking pillow was a simple thing, a pouch of animal hide or woven wool, stuffed with what nature provided: coarse wool, grass, dry moss, or even down feathers when available. It was firm, by today's standards, low in height, often shaped more like a bolster than the wide, squishy pillows most people now keep by the dozen on their beds. But this simplicity wasn't a compromise. It was purposeful. The materials were breathable. They repelled moisture, discouraged mites, and adapted to the seasons. In the summer, dry grasses stayed cool and crisp. In the winter, packed wool insulated just enough warmth to cradle the neck without trapping heat. Unlike modern pillows, which often elevate the head too far, these Viking headrests kept the spine in alignment. They didn't force the neck into awkward positions. They allowed it to rest naturally, in a straight line from head to tailbone. That slight firmness encouraged the muscles of the upper back to release, not sink, not strain, just settle. And for those who laboured each day in the fields, forests, or fjords, this was vital. Their bodies were strong, but tired. They didn't need luxury. They needed support. A pillow that gave them just enough lift to breathe well and nothing more. It might seem counterintuitive today. In a world filled with marketing promises, cooling gel, side sleeper zones, bamboo-infused layers, but often, complexity in pillows creates problems. Too thick, and the neck bends unnaturally. Too soft, and the head sinks, restricting airflow. Too many layers, and heat builds up, leaving the sleeper tossing by 2A. The Vikings didn't suffer these modern sleep traps. Their pillows were low-tech and low-stress, and they weren't just ergonomic. They were healthy. Many of today's synthetic pillows made with foams, polyesters, and chemical treatments are breeding grounds for allergens, dust mites, mold spores, skin dander. They all gather in warm, dense fibers that rarely breathe or dry properly. Over time, these pillows become silent irritants, contributing to asthma, sore throats, or sinus issues, especially in older adults. Viking pillows, by contrast, were naturally hyperallergenic. The wool repelled dust, the grass dried out moisture, the hide casing could be shaken out or replaced seasonally. They didn't hold on to bacteria. They didn't need special sprays or allergen covers. And perhaps more importantly, they connected the sleeper to their environment. To lie down on a pillow stuffed with hay from your own land, with wool from your own sheep wrapped in a hide cured by your own hands, that created a quiet kind of belonging. The sleep wasn't just physical, it was communal, spiritual, grounded in place. Today, some back-to-nature sleepers are rediscovering these benefits. Buckwheat pillows, wool-stuffed bolsters, hemp fiber inserts. They're not trends. They're echoes of what worked. Those who try firmer, flatter pillows often find their neck pain lessens. Their snoring softens. They wake up less groggy. Why? Because their cervical spine, finely unstrained, can rest. Because their airways, no longer compressed, can stay open. Because the nerves that run through the base of the skull down to the shoulders are no longer pinched or twisted. A good pillow doesn't pamper its supports. And the Vikings knew that. Not because they read studies or followed health influencers, but because their lives required sleep that restored without fuss. There was no luxury in sleep. There was only function, and that clarity, ironically, led to better rest. In burial sites across Scandinavia, archaeologists have found small headrests placed near the skulls of the deceased, sometimes carved from wood, sometimes padded with remnants of fabric. These were not afterthoughts. They were part of the sacred ritual of rest, both in life and death. To sleep well, the Vikings believed, was to be ready for battle, for harvest, for raising children, for honouring the gods, and that readiness began with the body position cradled, not crumpled. If you've ever woken with a stiff neck or aching jaw, your pillow may be the culprit, not your age, not your posture, just the wrong cushion. Try sleeping without a pillow one night, just a folded blanket. Let your body inform you. See what your spine tells you by morning, or switch to a firmer, flatter option just for a week. You may find that simplicity soothes, that nature's materials adapt, that your body doesn't need fluff, it needs balance. The Vikings weren't chasing perfect sleep. They were surviving. But in that survival, they stumbled on something timeless. The best pillow is the one that helps you forget it exists. Herbs for sleep. In the heart of a Viking home, long before sleep arrived, the scent of herbs would rise, not the pungent fumes of incense or chemical sprays, but a gentle aroma, earthy, floral, grounding. A handful of dried plants tossed into the fire, a pouch tucked into the bedding, a simple drink steeped in hot water. These were the quiet rituals of sleep. The Vikings lived in a world deeply entangled with nature. The forest wasn't scenery, it was medicine, and for sleep, they turned to plants. Among the most cherished was valerian. Its root, though strong-smelling, was known to calm the nerves and ease restlessness. It wasn't sweet. but when brewed into a tea or tucked beneath the bedding, it seemed to quiet the pulse. Warriors returning from long days or elders nursing aches might sip it slowly by firelight. The bitter brew a reminder that sleep, too, required intention. Hops, now known mostly for their role in brewing beer, were also dried and bundled for rest. Hung near the bed or crushed into sachets, hops released a mellow or resinous scent that eased anxiety. Some households kept braided garlands of hops in the rafters, not for decoration, but for sleep. Then came linden soft, sweet, and beloved in bloom. Linden flowers were steeped into delicate teas, shared between parent and child. Their aroma was lighter, almost honeyed, making them ideal for soothing the young or the frail on restless nights. A warm cup was as effective as a lullaby. Chamomile, too, found its way into Viking sleep rituals. Though native to southern Europe, it travelled through trade and found soil in the north. Dried flowers were bundled and crushed, brewed into golden teas that softened the stomach and slowed the mind. It wasn't rare to see an old woman preparing chamomile by lamplight, her hands worn but precise. Lavender, though less common in the north, was prized when available. Its scent, sharp and sweet, was used sparingly, reserved for moments of ritual, mixed with straw or wool and sewn into tiny pillows. Lavender worked not just on the nose, but on memory. It marked the threshold between waking and sleep. Some say children who slept with lavender near their heads dreamed more vividly. And then there was passion flower, imported, traded, rare, but known. Vikings who journeyed south brought it back, and though its role was smaller, its presence was meaningful. When boiled into decoctions or used in ceremonial blends, passion flower seemed to lengthen sleep's deep stages. Each of these herbs had its purpose, but they were never used carelessly. To make sleep tea was to perform a ritual. Water had to be heated just right, not scalding, not cold. Leaves or petals had to be measured by feel, not scale. The tea was often stirred clockwise, a superstition carried from older traditions, and it was always sipped slowly, in silence. Beyond tea, the herbs were burned, not in bonfires, but in small bundles smoke used to cleanse the air before bed. The ritual had as much to do with belief as biology. Some called it placebo, but for the Vikings, the line between medicine and magic was thin. If something helped you sleep, that was proof enough. Sachets were common too. Tiny linen bags filled with mixed herbs placed beneath pillows, between blankets, or hung near the hearth. Their scent would warm with body heat, releasing slowly through the night. Children learned to identify each herb by smell before they learned to write. Consider Thora, a widow living on the edge of the village. Her sleep was often broken. Grief, age, the ache in her knees. But each night, before she lay down, she brewed a blend linden and chamomile with a pinch of valerian. She would light a curl of dried lavender, whisper a quiet word to the gods, and drink. Her grandchildren thought her potions were magic. Perhaps they were. What mattered was not just the plant but the intention. These rituals created space for sleep. They signaled to the body the day is over. They reminded the nervous system to slow, to shift. Even in a noisy longhouse, filled with breathing bodies and crackling fire, the scent of herbs created an atmosphere, a pause, a deep exhale. In the modern world, we've traded these traditions for pills, clocks, and screens. We've forgotten that smell can guide the mind, that warmth can soften the will. But the science is catching up. Studies now show that valerian root can increase GABA in the brain. Chamomile has mild sedative effects. Lavender lowers heart rate and blood pressure. What the Vikings knew by instinct, we now confirm by lab. Herbs are not a cure-all, but they are tools. Natural, ancient, still here. These traditions weren't confined to the home. Travelling Vikings often carried sleep sachets with them, small pouches tied to belts or tucked into their tunics. Before resting outdoors, they'd scatter crushed herbs beneath cloaks or bedrolls. Even in hostile lands or rocky shores, the scent reminded them of home, and that familiarity offered comfort beyond logic. Herbal knowledge was passed down matrilineally. Daughters learned from mothers and grandmothers, not just which herbs to use, but when. Not all valerian was equal. Freshly dug roots were too strong. Hops picked under a full moon had deeper potency, or so it was said. Timing, intention, and preparation were as important as the herb itself. In some villages, entire families kept herb gardens just for sleep, raised beds along the southern wall, bundles hung from rafters. A child's first chore might be to gather chamomile heads with careful fingers, and at night, their reward would be a warm drink, a tucked sachet, and the comfort of tradition wrapping around them like a second blanket. For elders, these herbs eased transitions not just to sleep but toward the end of life. Thoros' final days, the story goes, were marked by lavender-scented air and the quiet bubbling of linden on her hearth. She passed in her bed, beneath a pelt, with the same blend she had brewed for decades. This wasn't just sleep. It was belonging, a return to the earth through its gentlest gifts. Food as sleep support in the Viking world. Food wasn't entertainment. It was fuel. It was medicine. And sometimes it was sleep support. The day began early, but not with breakfast as we know it. The first main meal was typically eaten in the late morning, after the hardest chores had been completed. This Dagvera combination of leftover stew, bread, or porridge was hearty and protein-rich. It kept energy steady through the labor-intensive hours ahead. The second meal, the natver, came in the late afternoon, just before dusk. This was the final intake of the day. It was rarely large. More often, it was a warm broth, bread, or roasted root vegetables with bits of fish or meat if available. But by modern standards, it was an early dinner long before the sun dipped beneath the fjords. This spacing of meals created a natural fast between sunset and sleep, and that rhythm had biological consequences. First, there was the impact on blood sugar. By avoiding late-night meals, the Vikings kept insulin levels stable. There were no midnight snacks to spike glucose, no sugary desserts to trigger crashes at 2 a.m. Their metabolism slowed as the evening darkened, preparing the body for rest. Their guts were quiet before their minds were. Then there was tryptophan. This amino acid, found in fish, game meats, eggs, and fermented dairy, is a precursor to serotonin and eventually melatonin. With the right food combinations, protein with slow-digesting grains, the Vikings unknowingly optimized their neurochemistry. A bowl of barley porridge with goat cheese wasn't just filling, it was sedating. Add to this the simplicity of their food, no preservatives, no artificial dyes, no chemical stimulants hidden in packaging, just whole ingredients oats, beans, dried apples, root vegetables. What they ate didn't confuse their bodies, it nourished them, timed perfectly with a cycle of light and dark. Even their portions served sleep. Meals were dense but not heavy. There were no overeating binges, no buffet-style indulgences. Food took time to prepare, and that alone slowed the process. Eating was an act often communal, always mindful. And as the coals cooled in the hearth, digestion had already begun. And there were no energy drinks, no after-dinner espressos, no chocolate cravings at midnight. Caffeine, for them, was non-existent. Stimulants came only in the form of adrenaline, sparked by battle or storm not from a cup. Their gut health likely benefited too. Fermented foods were common soured milk, preserved vegetables, pickled fish. These probiotics supported digestion, regulated hunger hormones, and may have indirectly improved sleep quality through the gut-brain axis. And perhaps most importantly, they were not eating in isolation. Meals were shared, talked through, settled with song or silence. Children sat beside parents. Elders broke bread first. That rhythm of eating together, ending the day in calm company, was part of the sleep ritual itself. Even more revealing is how their relationship with food mirrored their connection with time and nature. The sun, not a clock, dictated their meals. The fading light signaled that work and eating should end soon. This natural rhythm allowed melatonin, the body's sleep hormone, to rise unopposed. There was no artificial light delaying dinner, no television encouraging grazing into the night. This allowed the Vikings to sleep more deeply and consistently than many modern adults do. Today, we eat late. We snack while scrolling. We spike our blood sugar before bed, then wonder why our dreams are fractured. Science now confirms what Viking intuition already practiced. Eating too late at night elevates core body temperature and delays melatonin release. It also triggers nighttime awakenings when blood sugar drops rapidly during early sleep stages. Vikings didn't understand glycemic indexes or hormone cycles, but they didn't need to. Their lives were designed around movement, daylight, and seasonal rhythm. These patterns served their sleep. Moreover, their food was alive, not sterile. Each meal included naturally occurring microbes from the fermented whey in a wooden cup to the sour cabbage layered in barrels. These foods nurtured gut diversity, which we now know is deeply linked to brain chemistry, mood regulation, and sleep quality. They also ate with reverence. Meals began and ended with thanks to the land, the ancestors, the gods. That gratitude created emotional calm, something modern science ties to reduced cortisol and better digestion. It wasn't ritual for its own sake. It was rhythm, regulation, respect. If there's one lesson here, it's this: when we eat with intention, sleep follows more naturally. Imagine an evening meal made with whole food, simple grains, a warm broth, a slice of cheese, no phone, no distractions, just quiet. Maybe a candle, maybe silence. You finish. Clean slowly, sit by the fire or window, and let the body settle. This is how the Vikings did it. This is how we once knew how to rest. Today's world may not allow that every day, but one night a week might be enough. One quiet dinner, one early tea, one slow evening. That's how restoration begins. Food isn't just fuel. For the Vikings, it was a message to the body: the day is done. Rest is near, be still, fermentation and GABA. In the Viking world, fermentation wasn't a culinary trend. It was survival, but unknowingly, it was also neurochemistry. Before refrigeration, preserving food was essential. Vikings salted, dried, smoked, and perhaps most powerfully fermented. And in doing so, they stumbled upon one of nature's most ancient sleep aids, GABA. GABA, or gamma-aminobutyric acid, is a neurotransmitter that calms the nervous system. It slows down brain signals, reduces anxiety, and helps the mind transition into restful sleep. Today, many natural sleep aids, and even some pharmaceutical ones, work by increasing GABA activity in the brain. But long before modern labs synthesized such knowledge, the Vikings were brewing it, aging it, and eating it. One of the most iconic Viking fermentations was rackfisk trout salted and aged for months in cold cellars. To the outsider, it might smell intense, even offensive, but to the Norse, it was nourishing. And as modern research shows, fermentation processes like those used in rackfisk naturally enhance the bioavailability of GABA. Then there's skyr, thick, yogurt-like cultured dairy. Rich in probiotics, skyr was mild, filling, and restorative, consumed especially in the evenings. It soothed the gut and, by extension, the mind. Fermented dairy contains lactobacillus strains linked to increased GABA production in the gut-brain axis network. Modern medicine is just beginning to understand, but which Viking tradition practiced daily. Bread, too, played a quiet role. Not the fluffy loaves we know today, but dense, sour, stone-ground rounds. These surdei or sourdoughs were fermented slowly, often over days. That slow process broke down anti-nutrients, eased digestion, and fostered beneficial bacteria. As they aged, they became more than food, they became medicine. By nightfall, a Viking family might eat a supper of sour bread, soured milk, and pickled root vegetables. It wasn't elegant, but it was potent. Each element reinforced microbial balance. Each bite supported neurotransmitter health, and while they knew nothing of neuroreceptors or synapses, they did know this: they slept well. The link between fermented food and sleep is now well documented. GABA acts like a brake in the brain. It prevents overstimulation, reduces cortisol levels, and supports REM sleep. And fermentation, through specific bacteria, can naturally increase GABA levels in the gut. The same is true for certain amino acids and short-chain fatty acids generated during slow fermentation. In short, food-shaped mood, perhaps more profound, though, was the cultural rhythm of fermentation. It was patient. It was silent. It was slow. To ferment meant to wait. There were no microwave meals, no instant anything. A sour loaf required days. Skyr required steady hands and attentive eyes. Rackfisk demanded seasons. And in that waiting, something deeper brewed trust in time, in earth, in process. This mindset of slow preparation and humble reward mirrored the Viking approach to rest. Sleep wasn't chased. It was prepared for, built into the day's pace, and fermentation, in all its invisible labor, was both metaphor and medicine. Even now, Studies show that regular intake of fermented foods can reduce anxiety, lower inflammation, and support circadian rhythm. For elders especially, this is no small thing. As the body ages and stress accumulates, natural GABA production declines. Supporting it through diet offers a path gentler than pills. So when Thora, that wise old figure, finished her evening chores, she didn't reach for a sedative. She ate her sour bread, sipped a bit of whey, and sat in silence. Her body understood what her tongue couldn't name, that rest was already beginning. From the inside out, even the act of fermenting was deeply communal. Women often managed the process, passing knowledge from mother to daughter, refining the balance of time, salt, and temperature by feel and memory. Each household had its own strain, its own rhythm. Some sourdoughs were kept alive for decades, quietly fermenting on wooden shelves as children grew up beside them. A family taste for tang, its preference for texture, these were inherited as surely as songs or stories. There was also reverence for seasonality. Winter fermented differently than summer. Spring yielded softer cheeses. Autumn produced sharper brines. These subtle changes were noted and embraced. Fermentation was not static. It mirrored the people who practiced it, resilient, adaptive, patient. And because these foods were living, they required presence. One couldn't forget a crock of fermenting cabbage without consequence. The bubbling, the scent, the shifts in surface texture all had to be watched. This mindfulness bled into daily life. You paid attention. You didn't rush. You let nature do her work. In contrast, modern food systems remove us from this process. Our shelves are full of sterile, shelf-stable products. Preservatives replace time. Refrigeration replaces rhythm. And in that convenience, we lose the chemistry that nourished us for generations. Yet, fermentation is returning. From artisan bakeries reviving old sourdoughs to home brewers nurturing kefir grains, the ancient slow is finding its way back into modern life. And with it, perhaps, comes a gentler path to rest. Because when your belly is calm, your brain listens. When your gut bacteria are fed and balanced, your nervous system quiets. That's not folklore, it's physiology. So for those who struggle to fall asleep, for whom the night brings tension rather than comfort, maybe the solution isn't just melatonin gummies or blackout curtains. Maybe it starts in the kitchen, in a jar of something bubbling softly, in a slice of bread that took 3 days to rise, in the wisdom of microbes. The Vikings didn't have sleep clinics, but they had fermentation, and it worked. Physical fatigue for deep sleep. Viking life was not sedentary. It couldn't be. Every day demanded movement muscle, sweat, and endurance. From sunrise to dusk, physical exertion was the norm, not the exception. And this constant, purposeful activity played a powerful role in how deeply they slept. Forget the gym. Viking fitness came from necessity. Fields had to be ploughed by hand. Boats needed rowing miles of open sea, with no sail, just oars and arms. Firewood had to be chopped, livestock herded, houses built from logs, not lumber yards. Every task engaged the full body. There was no delegation, no offloading to machines. Movement was embedded in survival. This level of daily labour shaped their bodies, quite literally. Archaeological studies of Viking skeletal remains reveal something fascinating. Overdeveloped arm and leg bones. Tendon attachment points were larger. Joint wear patterns indicated repetitive, heavy motion. Even teenagers displayed the bone density of modern-day athletes. It's not a poetic assumption. They were strong because they had to be, and strength brought exhaustion. Not the kind born from mental stress or screen fatigue, but the kind earned through full-body work. When the sun dipped behind the fjords, Viking bodies were ready, muscles warm, blood flowing, glycogen spent. Their nervous systems didn't fight sleep. They welcomed it. In today's world, we often separate exercise from life. We squeeze in 30 minutes on a treadmill, hoping it will balance 10 hours at a desk. But the Vikings didn't exercise. They laboured. They carried their existence, quite literally, on their backs and shoulders. The result? A sleep so deep that even today's sleep aids struggle to replicate it. Physical fatigue activates what researchers now call homeostatic sleep pressure, the body's natural drive to recover. The more we use our bodies, the more efficiently we rest, but not all fatigue is equal. The stress of sitting under fluorescent lights, Staring into screens does little to trigger restorative sleep. If anything, it creates restlessness, mental clutter without physical depletion. In Viking longhouses, there was no such clutter. Tasks were tactile, rhythmic. You chopped, you hauled, you hammered. Every action had a goal, every hour had a motion. And with that motion came alignment between body and sleep, effort and rest. Mental health was likely better for it too. Physical labor is a natural stress regulator. It lowers cortisol. It anchors attention. It provides feedback and axe splits. A seed takes root. A beam fits into place. Today, many of us lack that feedback. Our work is abstract. Our stress is unspent. The body waits for an outlet it never receives. For the Vikings, the feedback loop was immediate. You worked, you got tired, you slept. No supplements, no routines to wind down, just the steady rhythm of cause and effect. This doesn't mean they lived without stress, raids, hunger, illness all were real. But their bodies were primed for resilience. Physical strain released tension. It didn't store it. And perhaps that's what we're missing. Not just motion, but purpose. Viking effort wasn't performative. It wasn't tracked by a smartwatch. It was part of something bigger, feeding a family, surviving winter, honoring tradition. That emotional context deepened rest. Imagine rowing 6 hours along a windless fjord. Your hands blistered, your shoulders raw. You dock, unload barrels, walk the slippery stone to your longhouse. You eat, maybe drink. You say little, and when you lay down, not on a plush mattress, but a hay-stuffed bench beside your body yields. Not because it's been told to sleep, but because it no longer needs to be awake. That's the kind of sleep we crave. Not just long, but deep. Not just still, but earned. Even in the winter months, when days were short and the cold bit deep, Vikings moved. Snow had to be cleared, animals tended, tools repaired, longhouses insulated with straw and skins. There was no off-season. The body remained in motion, season after season, in service of continuity. Rest was well earned, never idle, and children were no exception. From an early age, they mimicked adult labor, gathering twigs, carrying water, helping to mend nets or herd goats. This instilled not only physical capacity but a lifelong association between movement and rest. There was no concept of bedtime resistance. You collapsed into sleep because you were part of the day's work. Contrast this with modern life. We rely on artificial stimulation to stay alert: caffeine, blue light, mental overload, and then we need artificial sedation to counterbalance it. But our ancestors needed neither. They trusted their fatigue. They allowed it. They lived into it. Even culturally, effort was honored. Sagas didn't just celebrate warriors, they praised blacksmiths, shipbuilders, and farmers. Strength wasn't vanity, it was virtue. And part of that virtue was knowing when to stop. Night was not a deadline. It was a shelter, a place where the day's weight could be released. No scrolling, no financial worry projected onto a ceiling fan. Just the sound of animals settling, fire crackling, breathing slowing. Today, fitness culture can feel like a separate life. But for the Vikings, movement was life. It wasn't optional, and that gave their nights a rare grace room that many of us still long for. Perhaps the answer isn't in the perfect pillow or the optimized routine. Maybe it's in splitting wood by hand, in taking long walks without headphones, in stretching canvas, in planting something real. Not because it burns calories, but because it earns stillness. That's what the Vikings understood. A tired body is not a broken one. It's a complete one, ready to sleep, ready to heal, ready to rise again with the sun. Evening decompression rituals. After a day of relentless motion, the Viking evening unfolded not with urgency, but with stillness. The pace shifted, chores slowed, voices softened, and across the flicker of firelight, a different kind of work began: mental, emotional, communal. These were the sacred hours of decompression. In a world without electric clocks or schedules, time was felt, not measured. And so as dusk arrived, families instinctively gathered. They circled the hearth or sat shoulder to shoulder on long benches. Hands moved slowly, mending, weaving, polishing tools, but the tone had changed. The body might still be in motion, but the mind was beginning to rest. Storytelling was central. Long before Netflix or podcasts, Viking evenings featured sagas, epic tales of gods and giants, ancestors and battles, loyalty and betrayal. But these weren't just entertainment. They were decompression, a transition, a gentle lowering of the day's intensity. When Thora, the family matriarch, began to speak, children grew quiet, adults leaned in. Her voice became the metronome of the room, steady, low, rhythmic. And as she recounted the mischief of Loki or the wisdom of Odin, the room shifted. Bodies relaxed. Eyes softened. The nervous system responded. Modern neuroscience might explain this with terms like cognitive downshifting or parasympathetic activation. But the Vikings didn't need jargon. They had ritual. Just as today's sleep specialists recommend turning off screens and reading a book before bed, the Vikings told stories when they did it aloud, together. The auditory rhythm soothing, repetitive mirrored what modern minds crave in bedtime podcasts or audiobooks. The content wasn't always calm, but the delivery was, and it wasn't just stories. Women wove wool by lamplight, their fingers practicing patterns learned across generations. The act of weaving, repetitive, tactile, creative, was meditative. Children played simple games, sometimes reenacting the day's chores with wooden tools. Elders shared memories. Men oiled axes or repaired sandals. Each action said the same thing: the hard part of the day is over. There was also bathing, where possible. Not luxurious soaks, but quick rinses rival water in warmer months, heated basins in colder ones. The physical sensation of washing off grime mirrored the psychological cleansing. Water removed more than dirt. It marked a boundary. Day became night. Some evenings included herbal teas or infusions, mild preparations of chamomile, linden or valerian. These weren't dosed for sleep. They were shared, warm, passed between hands. Again, the ritual mattered as much as the remedy. And always, there was fire. Not just for heat, but for presence. Its flickering. Amber light signaled safety. Home. The day was done. The body understood. There was no doom scrolling, no late emails, no last-minute decisions. These things had no place after dusk. If something was unfinished, it waited. The night was not for effort, but for emptying. The sagas often ended with sleep. A hero resting beneath stars, a ship anchored under moonlight. Sleep wasn't a pause, it was part of the story. And so listeners mirrored it. Heads bowed, breathing deepened. The day had come full circle. Even today, bedtime routines that mimic this slow descent storytelling, touch, rhythm, ritual are shown to improve sleep quality. It's not the content, it's the container, the predictability, the presence. The Vikings didn't perfect this intentionally. They lived it because their world demanded it. But the wisdom remains. In a time obsessed with productivity, decompression is an act of resistance. To sleep like a Viking is to end the day deliberately, not abruptly, not reactively, but gently, with stories, with presence, with hands that still move, but without urgency. This was how the Vikings prepared for the dark, not by bracing against it, but by easing into it. Evening decompression was also a time for quiet learning. Younger children picked up skills without instruction, watching their mothers spin wool, mimicking the movements, absorbing the rhythms. There were no bedtime apps, no flashcards or worksheets, but in these hours, knowledge passed effortlessly, not just skills, but values. Patience, craftsmanship, listening, and music, when present, added another layer. Simple bone flutes, low-humming chants, even the rhythmic tapping of fingers against wooden bowls, these sounds lulled rather than excited. They grounded. Music was not performance, but participation. Everyone contributed. Even silence was part of the soundscape. Sometimes decompression included spiritual elements. A whispered prayer to the household spirits, a token left near the door. Not superstition, but orientation, a way of acknowledging forces larger than the self before surrendering to sleep. The longhouse itself helped. Its structure gathered people. Beds weren't separate, and neither were evenings. The fire in the middle was literal and emotional. It drew everyone close. Even the youngest child, fussy from a long day, was rocked to sleep in the presence of kin. There was a security in this rhythm, a knowing that, whatever the day had demanded, the night would hold you. The fire would burn low, the stories would be told, the silence would stretch just long enough. Contrast this with the modern evening, a flurry of screens, deadlines, digital noise. Our bodies struggle to recognize night. But in Viking times, there was no confusion. The day ended when the sky told you, and you obeyed. What's remarkable is how similar their rituals are to what sleep science now recommends. Dim lighting, repetition, storytelling, light physical activity, warm beverages, consistent timing, social connection. None of this is new. We've just forgotten. Perhaps the greatest lesson from Viking evenings is that rest begins long before the bed. It begins in how we close the day, in how we slow our minds, in how we return to the body. These things can't be rushed. They must be entered. So consider your own evenings. What stories are you telling? What rhythms mark your shift from day to night? Is your fire flickering or is your screen? We don't need to become Vikings to sleep like them, but we can borrow their wisdom, their patience, their ritual, because rest isn't a reward, it's a right. And like the Vikings knew, it begins before the first yawn. It begins when the world softens, when the hands move gently, when the story begins and everything else fades. And then, like the sagas always said, you sleep, not because you're tired, but because you're ready. A healthy sleep mindset. In the Viking world, sleep was never a task to conquer. It wasn't optimized, tracked, or controlled. It wasn't hacked with devices or measured against productivity. Sleep was a part of life, just like weather or tides, something to accept, not manipulate. This mindset, more than any material difference, set them apart from us. Today, sleep is often framed as a problem. We Google it, medicate it, compete over it. We build bedtime routines like battle plans, no caffeine after 2 p.m, blackout curtains, blue light filters, magnesium supplements, and still we lie awake. Not because our rituals are wrong, but because our mindset is, the Vikings didn't think of sleep as fragile. They didn't panic when it didn't come easily. If someone woke in the night, they might stir the fire, walk outside, or talk quietly with others. There was no shame in broken sleep, no panic about wasted hours. Sleep came and went in phases like the moon. It wasn't something you failed at. It was something you entered when the body and word allowed, where the Norse concept of fate shaped this relaxed relationship. It wasn't fatalism, but a trust in the interwoven threads of life. Some nights were stormy, some calm. That wasn't a personal flaw. It was the weave of existence. Dreams, too, were embraced rather than feared. Where modern minds often pathologize dreams, anxious symbols to decode or ignore, the Vikings saw meaning. Messages, sometimes warnings, sometimes affirmations. To dream vividly was a sign of openness, of receptivity. You listen to dreams like you listen to the wind or the crackle of fire, not always logically, but attentively. Sagas are full of dream sequences that shaped entire lives. A warrior dreams of a white bear before battle. A mother sees flames around her child. These weren't random. They were signs. You didn't need to understand a dream completely. You respected it. You shared it at the morning fire. Others might see what you missed. This collective approach softened fear. You weren't alone in your night thoughts. You weren't broken for waking in the dark. You were part of a long rhythm, woven through time and kin and story. Modern sleep culture, by contrast, is often solitary and anxious. We internalize failure. We count hours. We worry about consequences. The result, pressure, performance, irony. But the Viking mindset offers an alternative: let go. Be tired and lie down. Wake early. Tend the animals. Stir the fire. Speak softly. Trust that sleep will return. Don't measure it. Don't judge it. Accept it. This doesn't mean neglect. Vikings still valued sleep. They arranged homes to support it, drank calming teas, created soothing environments, but they did it without desperation, without metrics. They lived in partnership with sleep, not in pursuit of it. This acceptance extended to other areas of life as well. You didn't always control the harvest, the weather, the sea. You adapted, you endured, you honored the forces at play. The same was true at night. What emerges from this mindset is peace, not the peace of silence or darkness, but the peace of surrender. of knowing that your role isn't to command sleep, but to meet it gently, again and again, in a culture obsessed with improvement. That might feel radical, but it might also be the key. Because the moment we stop striving to sleep, we start remembering how. We start trusting our bodies, trusting the night, trusting that sleep, like all natural things, returns when invited, not demanded. Consider the story of Eric, a fisherman who lived near the northern fjords. Each morning before the frost had melted, he would rise, not by alarm but by the slow return of light through a hole in the longhouse wall. He rarely knew how many hours he had slept. Some nights he rose twice, once to mend a net, once to check the tide. Other nights he slept through without interruption. But he never wondered if he was doing it right. His wife, Solveig, often dreamed vividly. Once, she saw her dead sister standing in a field of crows. She spoke of it at breakfast, and her mother-in-law nodded solemnly. It meant change, they decided. That week, they moved their goats before a sudden storm. Coincidence? Maybe. But the act of listening gave the dream value. It became part of the family's decisions, part of their awareness. This approach reflects something modern psychology now echoes. What we believe about sleep shapes how we experience it. Sleep anxiety, ironically, keeps us awake. When we fear waking up at 3 a.m, we prime the brain to panic. But when waking is neutral, when it's just a moment, not a crisis, the body drifts back more easily. In Viking culture, you didn't fix sleep. You lived alongside it. You made room for its patterns, respected its shifts. Some nights were longer, others restless. But it all belonged. That belonging removed resistance. And this, perhaps, is the core of the Viking sleep mindset harmony between effort and surrender. During the day, they worked without excuse, rowing, carving, herding, hammering. But when night fell, they let go. They didn't drag their striving into the dark. They passed the weight to word, to time, to dream. This is a lost art in the modern West. We try to conquer even rest. But the old world whispers something else. Let the body be a body. Let sleep be messy and whole and human. Sleep wasn't optimized because life wasn't optimized. It was lived, fully, vulnerably, ritually. And when the longhouse grew quiet and the fire shrank low, no one asked how many hours they would get. They lay down among kin, among straw and wool, and gave themselves to the night. To adopt this mindset today doesn't mean living in the past. It means shifting our relationship, turning off the inner critic, saying tonight, I rest. However it comes. And if you wake, don't fear it. Don't fix it. Tend to something small. Read a page. Step outside. Let your mind drift, like a longship on a moonlit tide. And when the current returns, follow it home. This is how we reclaim sleep, not through control, but through reverence, through rhythm, through remembering that we once knew how to rest, before someone told us we had to. Far from the village, miles across frozen marshes and buried rivers, where no one dares build anymore, there lies another longhouse, smaller, sunken, half swallowed by time and moss. Its roof has collapsed in places. The beams sag inward like old shoulders. Birds nest in the eaves, and the doorway yawns open in permanent exhaustion. No one remembers this place, but it remembers everyone, especially you, because this is where it began, or ended, or both. The rafter here is not 10th, not numbered. It has no piers. It stretches from one end of the ruin to the others, smooth, pale, and dry despite the rot around it. It does not hum. It waits. And tonight, for the first time in generations, something shifts inside it. Not a sound, a breath. The beam exhales, quietly, as if testing whether the world is still listening. It is, you aren't supposed to be here. You don't even know how you got this far. You remember leaving the coast, walking inland. You remember hunger, ice in your boots, the sound of something crunching behind you that never showed itself. And then this house. You found it when you weren't looking. Or maybe it found you. You stand in the doorway now. The wood smells wrong like dried blood in an old bowl, brittle and sweet. You step inside. The floor doesn't creak, it sighs. And that's when you hear it. A breath. Not yours. Not from any animal. It comes from above, slow, steady, and wet with time. You tilt your head back. There's no fire, no mats, no bones, no signs of anyone. But that rafter white, wide, and completely untouched by decay, feels alive, like it's been waiting for you. Specifically you. You try to speak. The rafter exhales again. You don't run. That's the strange part. You know you should, that this isn't normal, that rafters don't breathe and beams don't know your name. But still, your feet stay planted. You take another step forward. The breath continues steady now, measuring you, matching you. Your eyes scan the ceiling for seams, carvings, proof of trapdoors or tricks, but there's nothing. Only wood and something inside it. You reach into your coat and pull out a stone. You didn't remember having it until just now. Smooth, dark grey, with a shallow groove across the middle like someone once tried to split it and change their mind. It's warm. You don't remember where it came from, but your hand curls around it like it belongs there. The rafter inhales, the house tightens, the air thickens, and suddenly you remember a braid, a song, a dream about counting beams in a house that hasn't been built yet. Your knees bend before you choose to kneel. The stone drops from your hand and lands without sound. The rafter doesn't blink, but you feel it watching, not with eyes, but with density, presence, like standing under a sky that remembers being touched. The breath sharpens. Now it matches your pulse. You reach up not to touch, but to offer. Your hand stays open, palm raised, as if catching rain that hasn't begun. And slowly, something rises. Not from the beam, from you. A hum. Quiet at first, just vibration, bone level, then breath level, then wordless, round, whole. The rafter answers. The sound it makes isn't one note, it's 10 pulses, 10 layers, like hearing all the old houses at once. A child's sigh, a mother's laugh, the crackle of a birth fire, the silence of a death unspoken, a braid being tied, a name forgotten, a prayer in reverse, a feather in mid-air, a goat bleating once, the door creaking shut forever. You sway. The hum holds you, and for the first time, the rafter speaks, not in your ear, in your ribs. You're late. You try to respond. Your mouth opens, but what comes out is a story. You don't hear yourself speak, but you know it's happening. You're not saying the words. They're falling from you. Memories you never lived. You describe a child with long hair and eyes like ice that hadn't melted. A longhouse where fire answered to humming. A village that slept without dreams until one girl began to listen. You speak of braids passed down instead of names, of rafters that remembered better than people did, of feathers that never touched the floor, of doors that opened only at the moment of forgetting. The rafter listens, not politely, devouringly. And the more you speak, the more you realize this isn't for the rafter. It's for the wood around you, the floor, the walls, the ghosts. They are the true audience. And when your story ends not abruptly, but like the tide pulling out you look down, the stone has vanished, and in its place is a single strand of hair, grey, coiled like a question. You don't touch it. The hair. It waits, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat wrapped in thread. The rafter breathes in again long, expectant. You can stay, it says, not out loud, through the grain of the wood, the pressure in your knees, the taste in your mouth like ash and honey. But if you stay, you won't remember the door. You don't ask which door. You already know. The one you never opened. The one you never saw. You look toward the exit. It's gone. Or rather, it's behind too many walls now. Not physical ones. Memory walls. Story walls. Rafter-deep walls. If you stay, you become part of the hum. If you leave, you carry it. You kneel for a long time, not to pray, to decide. Outside, snow begins to fall. Inside, the house begins to warm. Not from fire, from presence, from you. The strand of hair curls tighter, waiting. You reach for the strand, not quickly, as if your hand must ask permission from every joint, every past version of you, before moving. When your fingers close around it, it doesn't resist, it doesn't vibrate, it doesn't glow, it simply accepts you. And with that, the house exhales again. This time, it smells like pine, like wet fur, like sleep. The ceiling creaks, not in collapse, but in greeting. A bimmen you hadn't noticed slides into place above your head. There are now 2, not 1, not 10, 2, and you understand. You are not replacing the old. You are adding. The house is growing. The breath is widening. Your hum begins before you mean to. Deep, steady, a chord found between ribs and teeth. Outside, the snow doesn't fall faster. It just lands softer, as if afraid to interrupt. And somewhere beyond the marsh, another house hums back, low, answering. You don't rise. You don't need to. The rafter above you no longer watches, it listens, and through it, so do others. The walls of the forgotten house do not creak or fall. They inhale, once, and then again. With each breath, your hum spreads farther, into the beams, into the frost that veins the window cracks, into the roots tangled beneath the earth. Something responds, not language, a pulse, and far across the world, in another longhouse, a child stirs, not frightened, called. She sits up beneath her furs and blinks toward the ceiling where her rafter hangs crooked, old, and split. She listens to nothing and hears everything. You don't know her name, but your hum does, and already, the house around her begins to hold its breath. You feel it in your chest, the beginning of her part of the story, and you smile, not because it's over, but because it never is. And now the breath slows. The house no longer listens. It rests. Not because the hum has stopped, but because it knows the hum continues elsewhere. The snow falls like folded linen now. You don't see it, but somewhere, far above the roof, soft flakes settle into the lines of the wood, each one a quiet memory with nowhere urgent to be. Your knees, once pressed to earth, are no longer tense. The cold that once nipped your boots now feels like part of you, not pain, but the shape of stillness. Outside, the trees lean toward each other, not for warmth, just to listen. The girl with the braid, the boy who disappeared, the feather that never landed, they are no longer separate stories. They are verses of the same lullaby, and you, somehow, are the chorus. The longhouse, whether it stands or only remembers how knows your shape now. It will remember how you breathe. You don't need to stay, but you don't need to leave either. You're simply here, and here is enough. The rafters above do not hum, they murmur, a hush that cradles thought before it forms, a hush that says you did not come to understand. You came to rest, and so you do. No final words, no braided endings. Just the house, just the hum, just the slow rhythm of something ancient curling around your breath until the only sound left is sleep. What we can learn today. We have travelled deep into the world of Viking sleep, not just the beds or herbs or firelight, but the rhythms and philosophies that shaped a way of resting, almost lost to time. And now, as we return from that world, one truth remains clear: the Vikings didn't try to sleep well. They lived in a way that allowed sleep to arrive. In the modern world, we chase sleep, we optimize it, we track it on apps, worry about REM cycles, and build bedtime routines with military precision. But the lesson from the longhouse is different. Sleep is not a performance. It's a consequence, a result, something that follows a life lived in rhythm with the body, with the land, and with others. So what can we carry forward? What from this ancient ecosystem of Viking rest can serve us in cities of concrete and light? There are 7 core pillars, 7 parts of what we might call the Viking sleep ecosystem. Segmented sleep. The understanding that sleep comes in waves, not blocks. First sleep, midnight waking. Second sleep. The Vikings accepted this as normal, as we can too. Darkness as a medicine. True darkness, free from artificial glow, cued the body to rest. They didn't fear the night. They welcomed it. Today, we can mimic this with warm light, fewer screens, and slower evenings. Communal presence. They slept close, not isolated in rooms behind doors, but beside kin. That sense of safety, of being known and protected, made deep sleep possible. While we may not live in longhouses, we can seek connection before bed, conversation, contact, a voice in the dark, physical tiredness. Their bodies worked, hard, daily, not through gym memberships, but through purpose. That natural fatigue was the truest sleep aid. We, too, can invite movement. Gardening, walking, carrying, crafting. Let the body earn its rest. Herbal and seasonal support. They brewed teas, used lavender pouches, burned calming woods, not as miracles, but as gentle allies. We have these tools still, but it's not about dosage, it's about ritual, consistency, and intention. Evening ritual stories as weaving, firelight, these anchored the descent into sleep. Today, we call them routines, but the soul of it remains repetition, quiet, meaning, a way to tell the body, it's time, mindset of acceptance, and perhaps the most important of all, they didn't try to sleep. They allowed it. No shame in waking, no panic in restlessness, no identity in being a bad sleeper, just rhythm, just weird. These 7 aren't steps. They're reminders that sleep, like breath or digestion, is something the body knows how to do if we stop getting in the way. So what does this mean for us now, for the entrepreneur checking email at midnight, the freelancer working across time zones, the elder who wakes at 4 a.m. and worries what's wrong? It means letting go of the idea that sleep is a prize or a test. It is not earned through control. It arrives through surrender. It means creating space, not strategies. It means trusting that if we return to slower evenings, darker rooms, meaningful routine as sleep will follow. It means remembering that we were never meant to sleep alone, in silence, under blue light, with pressure and panic in our chests. We were meant to drift, together, surrounded by familiar sounds, stories, and flame. We were meant to rise in the night, stir a pot, share a thought, then return to bed like it was nothing. This is the Viking way, and perhaps it's the human way. In the long arc of history, it is we who are strange sleeping under digital skies, battling our own biology, racing against the natural clock. But we can come back, gently, not with more effort, but with less. Start by dimming the lights, turn off the noise, light a candle, tell a story, touch someone's hand, drink something warm, let your breath deepen, and if sleep does not come quickly, wait, rest anyway. Let the body fall, slowly, back into knowing. Because sleep, like the sea, arrives on its own tide. You cannot command it, but you can welcome it. You do not need to deserve rest. You only need to live in a way that allows it. That is what the Vikings teach us. That is what we forgot. That is what we can learn again. The Vikings' sleep ecosystem wasn't perfect. It was born from necessity. Winters were brutal. Food was scarce. Life expectancy short. But even amid hardship, they built rhythms that supported resilience. They knew that a tired body and quiet mind were the best companions to the cold. And they passed this wisdom not through books, but through evenings. Through the way a mother tucked a child near the fire. Through the way an old man stirred coals at midnight without fear. Through the way communities rose and rested together. Modern science is finally catching up. Sleep researchers now promote segmented sleep as natural. Melatonin levels rise best in true darkness. Physical exhaustion improves deep sleep cycles. Herbal support helps regulate circadian rhythms. But what science cannot replicate is the trust, the surrender, the patience of a culture that didn't chase results. You can't hack your way to Viking sleep. You must inhabit it. You must turn down the internal dial that says not enough and raise the one that says this is enough. So as you close your day, don't ask, how can I sleep better? Ask, how can I live in a way that makes sleep welcome? Can you eat when your body's hungry? Not just when the clock says so. Can you slow your evenings with intention? Even if only for 10 minutes. Can you swap one notification for a moment of stillness? Can you allow dreams to be strange and beautiful, without judgment? These aren't techniques. They're choices. They're invitations. And if tonight is restless, let it be. If dreams wake you, listen. If the body stirs at 3 a.m., rise without resentment. These are not failures. They are part of the pattern. They are part of you. The Viking way of sleep is not about sleep at all. It's about relationship with the self, the home, the night, the unknown. It's about shifting from mastery to trust, from control to rhythm. So tonight, be Viking. Not in armor or axe, but in how you surrender, how you soften, how you return to the rhythm your ancestors once knew so well. Let the night come, let the body drop its burdens, let the mind wander like a ship in fog, and know that when you wake, it will be morning not because you commanded it, but because the world turned, and you turned with it, and that is enough.